What is the most messed up thing that happened in a children's TV show? Too many episodes of Hey Arnold, like finding out Stoop Kid stayed on his stoop because he was abandoned there and was homeless but hopelessly waiting for someone to come back for him. How Monkey Man was mentally ill and also homeless. That one where you learn Grandpa and his sister had a lifelong rift because the only good thing in their life as children, their puppy, got killed by a car in front of them and they each blamed the other. How Leela and her dad are squatters to keep from being homeless. How the kids on the show routinely get mugged. Or how Mr. Hyan hates Christmas because that's the anniversary of the day he handed his baby daughter off to an American soldier to get her out of the war zone because he wasn't sure they'd survive. Then spent the rest of his life working to immigrate to America to try and find her, only having the name of the city to work from, and ended up missing her whole childhood because he was too poor to hire a private investigator. Until Helga literally sold the shoes off her feet to hire one to make Arnold happy. Oh, and how Helga is obsessed with Arnold because she grew up neglected by an alcoholic mother and aggressive narcissistic father who only cared about her older sister. And Arnold was literally the first person in her entire life to show her any kindness when, as a preschooler, he offered to share his umbrella because her parents forgot to take her to her first day of preschool and she had to walk in the rain by herself with no coat as a 4-year-old in what we can only assume is New York City. So yeah, that show was supremely jacked up. Hey Arnold was one of those shows that got real in not just plot but emotional consequences. It even got us to relate to the rich kid Lorenzo in how isolating and emotionally empty a privileged life can be. It never shied away from real world things like poverty, trauma, corrupt politics, Mr. Green's run for mayor, or anything that parents tend to hide from the 10-year-olds watching it. Henry the Tank Engine was bricked up inside an abandoned tunnel for having anxiety while Ringo Starr mocked him. There was a story from Chicago's golden age of children's television. At WGN in the 1950s, a chimpanzee was the sidekick to host, and were doing testicles to Three Stooges shorts. One time they had a guest who had a parakeet that could perform various tricks. Here's the quote from the book. The bird, perched on the woman's hand, went through a series of routines as Grayson, the host, and Chatter, the chimpanzee, looked on. In the middle of the act, Chatter suddenly grabbed the bird, bit its head off, and, without missing a beat, placed the carcass back on the shocked woman's hand. As his guest crumpled to the floor, a stunned Grayson stared at his partner and the station cut quickly to a commercial. That's pretty messed up. Not really as messed up as Out of These, but still creepy. That episode of Tom and Jerry where Tom gets depressed and sits on a railroad track, waiting for a train to come. Then Jerry comes to join him sitting down. The episode cuts to black and ends, and it never mentions it after that. Strange. For us in the UK, the Animals of Farthingwood, graphic, gruesome death was a regular feature. It included Mr. and Mrs. Hedgehog getting run over, Mr. Pheasant is shot dead as he stares in horror at his dead wife, shot earlier, who has been cooked and roasted, Sinuous the adder is choked to death by rats, the baby mice are impaled on thorns by a shrike. There were 24 deaths across 39 episodes, every one of them a major character. Remember when SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs murdered and buried the health inspector? This was a great episode though. Either the series finale of Alf, in which Alf is captured by the government presumably to be experimented on, or the series finale of Dinosaurs, in which the entire civilization is destroyed. There was an episode of SpongeBob where Squidward got brain damage and thought he was a baby. Then the rest of the episode is just SpongeBob and Patrick throwing him about, and new SpongeBob is just plain sadistic at times. Soupy sales in 1965. New Year's Day incident. On the 1st of January, 1965, miffed at having to work on the holiday, Sales ended his live broadcast by encouraging his young viewers to tiptoe into their still sleeping parents' bedrooms and remove those funny green pieces of paper with pictures of US presidents from their pants and pocketbooks. Put them in an envelope and mail them to me, Soupy instructed the children. Several days later, substantial amounts of money had begun arriving in the mail. Sales stated that the total amount received was in the thousands of dollars, but qualified that by stating that much of that was in play money. Sales said he had been joking and that whatever real money had been sent would be donated to charity. But as parents' complaints increased, WNEW's management suspended sales for 2 weeks. When Big Bird asked Stevie Wonder to come take a look at this. There is an episode of Scooby-Doo, one of the ones with Scooby, Shaggy and Scrappy only, where they are being chased around a pyramid by a mummy and they beat him by unraveling him. But then when they are leaving they turn round and footsteps are following them in the sand. They run away, footsteps return to the pyramid and then the episode ends. Only example in classic Scooby I think where the monster was real. Fair to say I've been scared of mummies ever since. I'm in my 20s. There's this Hey Arnold episode called The Ghost Bride and the story is basically that this lady was madly in love with her fiancé but was stood up at the altar because he had fallen in love with her sister and married her the very next day. So the lady goes berserk and puts on her wedding dress, gets snacks from her basement, walks to the newlywed couple's home, kills them both in their beds, and when the cops come, she's rocking back and forth in a rocking chair next to the bodies, throwing rice on them and humming the wedding march. To finish it all off, she immediately jumps out of the window and kills herself. The Looney Tunes where the bulldog, I think his name is Caesar or Romeo, anyway he wants to keep a kitten, his owner is already mad so he tried to hide kitten, stuff happens and he ends up believing the kitten was baked into cookies and the owner gives him a cat shaped cookie and he's crying puddles of tears and grabs the cookie pretending it's the kitty, completely traumatized. I remember that episode of the Magic School Bus when that ginger dude took off his helmet in space after being told not to and his dome turned to ice or something like that. Spooked me as a kid. Basically the plot is, Arnold's relative visits the school and is skeptical about MRS Frizzle. They go to space and the relative is collecting rocks to show to her class. She went to a different school. Once they go to all the planets, her rocks are so heavy that the bus can't go. The relative refuses to get rid of any rocks. Arnold gets fed up with it and takes off his helmet to convince her to go home. The worst part, MRS Frizzle doesn't do a thing. There was a very special anti-drug episode of the 80s cartoon Brave Star. In this episode, a couple of kids get hooked on a new drug. At the end of the episode, one of the kids died from an overdose. 30 plus years later and I'm not sure how many children's shows even today would kill a kid. That episode of Thomas the Tank Engine when Thomas visits the scrap heap where all the dead dying trains are. I remember watching it as a kid and not even thinking about how Thomas is basically surrounded by a bunch of corpses or people left to die. In the original Powerpuff Girls there was this episode called Buttercrush that I never really forgot. Buttercup sort of got into a relationship with the leader of the Gangrene Gang but the leader kept on taking advantage of her and she had no idea. It gets to the point where she ditches her sisters to hang out with him, but he just keeps on using her. Of course at the end she realized what was going on and beat him up. Though, I guess it really wasn't that dark or anything, but it always made me feel sick inside when I saw it. Maybe it was partly about age difference, but it was the first time I saw a relationship like that in a cartoon. That one episode of Pingu where he has a nightmare. In the nightmare, a gigantic brown seal chases him while smiling creepily. This episode still gives me the spooks to this day. Speaking from personal experience, it was when the Watergate hearings replaced my usual after-school helping of Batman, and it went on for months. Did you watch it thinking Batman was gonna come out and win them the case? In the show Powerpuff Girls, one of the writers wrote himself onto the show to become Blossom's boyfriend, and they aired it. That day in Adventure Time, he had kidnapped everyone in a city and then systematically covered them with his orange saliva and stuck them to the side of the wall in a sewer. Adventure Time also had some seriously existential episodes as well. One that always sticks out to me is the one where Finn gets cursed inside of a dungeon, and every single time he opens his eyes he is transported right back to where the curse first started. He escapes the dungeon over and over, living months, maybe even years, as a blind kid before eventually giving in and opening his eyes only to be transported back in time to the beginning of the dungeon in the exact same manner. Jake often never believes Finn is cursed and forces Finn's eyes open, resetting everything over and over like Groundhog Day. He eventually breaks the curse by abandoning Jake and wandering blind and aimlessly across the world, for God knows how long, until he happens upon the dungeon's twin. When he finally exits the twin dungeon, he opens his eyes to Jake greeting him as if time never looped in the first place. As a child I remember being fairly traumatized over a series called David the Gnome where he and his wife reach 400 and die together in the finale. They actually become cherry trees intertwined together in the next plane. I remember trying to explain to my mother why I was crying so hard watching the TV but she didn't get it. Not exactly on the children's show itself, but about 20 years ago during a midday episode of the Spider-Man cartoon. The news broke in to cover a live high-speed chase that ended in a standoff on a popular Los Angeles freeway. The suspect abruptly blew the top of his own head off with a rifle on live television. Camera caught everything. I assure you kids watching that were never the same. Half of the things in Star Wars The Clone Wars could qualify. One notable example was when a corrupt general attempted to order his slave soldiers to court-martial some of their dissenting brothers and execute them via firing squad.